So we'll now be joined up here by some panellists, and if I could invite you to come up first. And our panellists are Gerard Goggin, Professor of Digital Communications and Deputy Director of the Journalism and Media Research Centre at the University of New South Wales, and Sue Salthouse, President of Women with Disabilities and also a member of the ACAN board, Mark Armstrong, Director of Network Insight Institute, and Paul Harrison, Senior Lecturer at Deakin University. And we might start actually with Gerard and just invite some observations and, if you'd like, a question to the panel.
Thanks very much, Alan. So, I suppose I wanted to start by saying I'm all in favour of evidence, and I'm really glad that actually we're talking about this in communications, because I suppose to just cut straight to the case, to the chase now that I'm perhaps no longer on the ACAN board, it just seems to me that we haven't talked about that for quite a while. And for me, I don't recognise the characterisation that perhaps comes from the government when they say we've had problems because consumers haven't been providing evidence. We heard from Abel then saying the other side, that the sort of frustration for the consumers. But it seems to me actually questions of evidence haven't really been openly discussed or called for in communications policy for about the last 10 years. I'm going to grossly generalise here. But I suppose MPS is an excellent example. I mean, I'm astonished now to hear it presented as a lesson in this area where it seems to me the lessons have not been learnt at all. And it seems to me the lessons are exactly about evidence. And for me, the problem in this was, in fact, very few of the participants around this actually wanted to contribute to an evidence base around this. And it seems to me this is the issue that we're facing. And we've heard some, I think, excellent presentations here that explore the sort of complexity of evidence base and the kinds of frameworks that you could adopt that I think Robert's presented. Let's do that. We haven't. I think we're still not doing it. And I don't think we've actually been clear about that, because it seems to me it's rather one-sided still. It's in a sense in which we're hearing clearly from government, and I would acknowledge that the funding of ACAN is a really significant opportunity for consumers to actually get what they asked and now see how they go with it, i.e. capacity to do research, so can consumers actually do it. But it seems to me there's this one-sided emphasis to say, consumers, if you want evidence-informed policy making, where is it? Whereas when we hear from across, the range of participants, there's often not actually much evidence being, produced to actually justify the policies. So it seems to me I get a strange resonance about that. It's not one-sided. I think all the participants are in this, and I'd really like to hear the discussion on what is the evidence base we need around communication policy. I think it's right, there's uncertainty. There's interesting issues around social media, and that actually raises a whole set of new issues. And it seems to me we've got some great science here. I commend ACMA particularly for the work that they are doing. It seems to me they are doing research and putting it into the public domain. And I know a range of other entities are engaged in that as well that I'll forget on the spot. But it seems to me we need to understand what's the relationship between that kind of research, the research that academics are doing that I think that I'm doing that is uncoordinated and that could be brought together, and that people like Mark Armstrong particularly are trying to bring that together. What are those data we need? How can we put that together? Then I think we have to have the discussion about what counts as evidence. Because I think if you look at this, and we've talked about it a bit today, but particularly with MPS, what counts as evidence? Many people have been saying for quite some time there were some problems. And one of the difficulties is particularly in the co-regulatory processes with the framework that I think the government rightly claims credit for starting to fix. It's not the case that the regulators, I think, are in a situation of saying, well, we don't have the powers to act in this, although we may have concerns. So what do you do in a co-regulatory process where evidence seems to count at some stages for not a lot? And there's not actually the arbitrators or the ways to look at evidence. And I think one of the problems that perhaps consumer advocates face is the kinds of evidence that one feels one has can be rejected, what people have called, Christopher Newell used to call it, rejected knowledge. So the stories that people have which are really important, and it's great to hear that they count for something, often there's a feeling actually that's not the kind of evidence we want. And that one of the difficulties, I think, which is the interplay between quantitative and qualitative research is, what are the numbers? What are the presumptions about the numbers? Having the interaction between this is very important. So I suppose, to sum up, I'd be saying, what is the evidence collectively we need in this area? How will we get it? How will we put it together? And I think that is really a joint enterprise. And then I think we should be honest to say, if we aspire to policy that's evidence-informed, do we get that? Is it transparent? We've heard remarks to saying on the big ticket issue, something that's put out the window, but it seems to me the problem with MPS is that precisely was not about evidence-based policy until about the last 2 years.
So just before we come to Mark Armstrong, who's been able to look at these issues from, I guess, pretty well every perspective there is, I'd just invite Robert to respond on that issue. Do you see any evidence of one-sidedness in this? And if so, what might be done about it?
Oh, look, I think there's a couple of things. The first thing that became very clear in the consumer policy inquiry was that, in fact, the consumer advocacy were struggling to provide evidence of sufficient quality, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. And one of the things we did in the recommendations was firstly to recommend a substantial funding for a research centre that would be established in Australia. And the second thing is we did in fact promote the support of consumer advocacy. Now, I don't think anyone in this room knows how hard it was to get those recommendations up in the Commission itself. But the point that really won the day was it is completely unfair and inappropriate to ask a disparate sector, poorly resourced, to be able to provide the evidence if you in fact don't provide some of the support, both academic research and funding to achieve it. The ultimate point is this is in fact about getting good quality public policy. So why those recommendations are there, and they would not normally be in Commission reports, I have to tell you, is because at the end of the day it serves the purpose of public policy to have a well-informed, well-resourced, well-researched consumer group, as it does from business, as it does from government itself. And I might just say, don't undersell yourselves. Many of the business groups that present to us, they have much more money than you, but I have to say their submissions are no more meritorious, nor in fact skillfully presented in some cases. But it was a glaring problem in this particular sector, and I'm pleased to see that there's been some responses, at least in different parts of the sector, to those concerns.
Although the substantial investment in the advice
yes.
hasn't gone ahead yet, but
yet.
we live in hope. Mark.